excited to dive into this conversation with you. Obviously, as one of the co-founders and the CEO of ADHD Online, you have your own ADHD story. So, Zach, I'm hoping that we could kind of start back at the beginning and go back to your own diagnosis.
Yeah. Love to relive a lot of the process of being able to identify what was going on in my mental space, right? So when I was a teenager, I had the entrepreneurial bug, right? I wanted to do something at scale. So I started companies when I was in my mid-teens to upper teens, and I had a lot of failures, but a couple successes. And with the failures, I've learned that I truly didn't understand why I thought the way I did, and I wanted to understand more about why I thought the way I did, and also, while in my mid-teens, I was going to school, obviously, and when I was in high school, I wasn't getting the best grades, and I didn't have resources to be able to help me identify why I wasn't getting the good grades or why I wasn't being able to pay attention the way my fellow students were paying attention. So, at 17 years old, I went through the diagnosis process of understanding my mental health, and I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I go, oh, that makes sense. So then I was put on a regimen of therapy, medication, and just trying to figure it out. And it was just like this aha moment. Like, got it. Now that I understand ADHD, I was able to find resources, know that I'm going to think about things differently than other people, and then use that as an advantage in life. So I continued to start and fund more companies and being able to help, and it just evolved from there.
When you look back at the diagnosis, and you mentioned the failures, trying something, which I think trying something is the hardest thing. And the failure is really learning, but we don't phrase it that way in our brains, right? We aren't looking at that. But when you look back at the diagnosis and the stuff that was happening with some of those projects you were taking on, can you see where the ADHD was coming out?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of energy, right? It was a lot of energy and passion, and you see it today even in a lot of ADHDers, is they have a lot of passion for whatever drives them and what gets them up in the morning. Right, so it's something that allows us to be able to say, I love what I do, and I'm going to continue to keep the gas pedal down. And for ADHDers, it could be an impulsive thing, it could be a proactive thing, it could be a reactive situation, and where you're going to be able to pivot much faster than somebody that may not have ADHD.
I want to ask, so you mentioned kind of getting the diagnosis, having the aha moment, and then starting into that treatment plan and figuring out what was working for you. And I love that you mentioned just understanding how your brain works, because I think that it's crucial to just know why we say yes to certain things or we say no to certain things. How has your treatment plan changed over the years? Because 17 is very young, and obviously you talk about all the things that can happen between then and now, and starting a bunch of different companies, starting ADHD Online, getting married, having children. What have you added and taken away to make sure that it's working for you?
I took away medication. So I was put on medication as the initial regimen that I should try, but it just didn't work for me. I got headaches, and there were some other complications, and I'm like, no, I'm going to figure it out myself. I'm going to be able to get the tips and tricks and resources to be able to help me find the best way that I can manage my ADHD, because everybody's different.
Right.
So for me, it was many years of being able to manage it in a way of starting more companies, not having that fear of failure, and just keeping myself busy ultimately, right? So until it came to the time where my wife said stop buying more companies. It was an issue. So it was fun though.
It's always interesting when you hear the other side of the neurodivergent relationship, when it's somebody who's neurotypical, and you're like, oh, that bothers you.
Yeah, great balance, by the way.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Idealist, realist, right? Yeah, my wife, the saint that she is, she understood from the onset. I think differently, but she complements that so well. So it really was a great partnership.
It's like fishing. You have to give out enough line to get the fish interested, but then, you have to pull back because,
I'm a great salesman.
Yes, I like it. It's important to talk about the negative side of things because, there's this mindset right now of like making ADHD your superpower, which is amazing. But for some people who are new to their diagnosis or are in a rough patch, it can feel very isolating because you're like, I'm not having that amazing feeling about my ADHD. So when you look at how ADHD has shown up in your life, what are some of the negatives? And it doesn't have to be anything big. It can be stuff you've even worked through.
Yeah. So that stigma of having it as a disability is completely untrue. It is an ability to be able to think differently. Not everybody has to have that aha moment, right? You can have the ability to say, this is going to be an evolving understanding of myself. This is going to be something where I'm going to find a sweet spot eventually. Some people find it right away. Some people find it eventually. But for me, it wasn't right away where I found that ability to manage my ADHD correctly to where I was at an optimal stance. And for others, just the same.
Your superpower is the entrepreneurial spirit, which is working really great for you right now in Grand Rapids with everything that's happening around here, especially with, so many different tech startups. When you look at the most beneficial part of your ADHD, is there a way to narrow it down?
Yeah, it's being able to think at scale, right? So Grand Rapids, we cultivated this idea out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And this idea, within days, had the dream of a much larger exposure. So we wanted to say, this was fun here, but I think it's going to be more fun if we go to all 50 states. And we did that rapidly. And we were able to say, we can help people, and we see the benefit and the outcomes here locally, but across the nation at scale, it's been amazing. So I think so far to date, we're almost at 100,000 people across all 50 states.
It's an interesting time for telemedicine because of the pandemic, and I'm curious how, with ADHD and the ability to focus and stay on task, did that throw you at all, the pandemic? Because for the rest of us, it was this moment of like our lives were shutting down, but for you and for ADHD Online, it was like, no, we need to ramp up. Like, this is our moment to show what we are capable of doing and how we can help people. And for the first time, telemedicine became not just something that we were helping people in rural communities, it was a necessity for everyone. I mean, I remember sitting on my couch having a dermatology appointment, like showing my phone camera, like to the moles to my doctor.
Yeah.
In those moments of those days, the early days of the pandemic, what was going through your brain?
Yeah, so we were a disruptive company, 2018 to our pandemic stage.
Yeah.
We're very disruptive because we took a diagnosis process that took 7 months in a traditional setting and made it 3 days or less. So there was some headwind against the organic tailwind growth, but when that pandemic happened, we immediately saw that demand and pivoted and said, okay, now we're diagnosis and treatment. So we went from disruptive to innovative. So that innovative part of us, we were able to say, okay, now we need to scale this, adding employees and more staff to be able to help the demand that we've seen from patients on the treatment side, whether it's medical treatment or teletherapy or both.
I know that you and Dr. Duttler, a part of the story was, the origin story for ADHD Online is your own son's journeys going through the process. And tell me some of the things for you as a father watching that unfold, because you had gone through it and from the sounds of it had a very positive experience.
Yeah.
And then you're there as an advocate for your most prized possession, like one of your children. Yeah. What were some of the things that you noticed that were really frustrating?
So frustrating, I don't know if it was necessarily frustration. It was more of saying I've identified in my son the abilities that I have, and it's almost like a proud moment to be able to say, I've been through this process. I know how I'm going to be able to help him throughout his journey of having ADHD. And the tips and tricks that I've learned may not work for him necessarily, but it may be a great launch pad for him to identify the ability for him to manage his own ADHD. So it was more of a proud moment for me, which may be weird to hear. But not necessarily frustration, but more of the ability to help my son.
And on the medical side of things, with the actual assessment and the things that you were going through, what did you notice? Had things changed from your time? So compared to our model, no. So when you were 17 and you
Yeah.
went in and you took the assessment, and then your son's doing it, however many years later, what was the process like? Was it different? Did you notice things?
So it was through us, our process.
Okay.
Yeah, because my son was still of the age of where we can diagnose here. So yeah, it was.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So in the scheme of the early patients for ADHD Online, your son is one of them.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure it worked for us before it worked for the public. So we went through efficacy ourselves to make sure.
That's really amazing. I did not know that.
Yeah.
What a special way to be able to look back at the company and go, like, we were really in it from day one.
Yeah.
Making sure that, to put your family in the front and go, we're going to make sure that this works before we send it out to anybody else. It kind of speaks volumes.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
I want to ask, and I'm kind of afraid for the answer with this collaboration, because I'm going to ask you what you're excited about and what's on the horizon. And knowing your entrepreneurial spirit, I'm a little afraid of how much he is going to tell me and how extensive it's going
Sure.
to be, in a great way.
Yeah.
In a great way.
Yeah.
So when you wake up in the morning and you start thinking about the future,
Mm-hmm.
what is jumping out at you? What is getting you up? Where are you pulling energy from?
The potential is immense, right? So ADHD was fun. What's next, right? So if we're able to help ADHDers identify and manage what's going on with them, what can we do with people who are experiencing anxiety, depression, PTSD, dyslexia, all of the other things that surround ADHD, other comorbidities, or other modalities like autism, addiction. What can we do to be able to help that demographic that's experiencing those issues and identify a better process for managing that?
It's really interesting this time that we're in. The pandemic, for most people, there aren't silver linings. I felt so out of control for most of it, and then got my own ADHD diagnosis, and then went back to work. And so it was kind of just like this thrown back into the fire. But it really was this time for all of us to stop and pause and start to kind of take stock of what was working and what wasn't working. And the great part of the internet, for all the terrible things, is hearing other people's stories and being able to connect and go, oh my goodness, like, that's how my brain thinks, or that's how I feel. Like, I remember the first time I realized what anxiety felt like, and I was like, oh, so those weren't just stomach aches. Like, there was something leading to that. And so you have this model, and how wonderful to be in a time where people are actually talking about mental health and looking at it with a much bigger lens.
Yeah, I couldn't be where I'm at today without the peers and people to help me get there, right? So it really comes down to experience. If I'm able to communicate with others who have similar experience or on a similar track to where I'm headed, and they're able to say, hey, here's the failures that I've been through, here's what I've learned to do, but more importantly, what I've learned not to do. That's what I want to be able to give the rest of the community, is those kind of insights into the experiences of failures and successes in life, whether it's business or personal.
And a lot of the times, I have this conversation, I'm a gray area person. My life and work, there's a big gray area. I'm not somebody who works 8 to 5 and leaves it and doesn't touch it. It is an all-day thing. And I do think that there are a lot of people who find themselves there because more and more of us are going after the things we're passionate about.
Yep.
And so it's tough.
Yeah, passion doesn't have a timeline, right?
No.
It doesn't have a clock in, clock out time for the day. It is all day, 24/7, 365. So it's something that you just got to be able to enjoy the ride, because it's going to be nonstop.
Let's wrap this up because of October being ADHD Awareness Month, and the whole point of telling as many stories as possible in these 31 days is to change the narrative and really dive into how complex ADHD is and the different ways it shows up for people. So I'm curious, you've got quite a few years and then building a telemedicine healthcare company based around ADHD. What is something you wish the public understood better, or like a stigma that just has to go away?
Yeah, ADHD is not a mental disability. It's a mental ability, right? And to be able to manage it correctly, that's something that people need to identify for themselves, right? There's not one way to do it right. So for them, use us as a resource, use the family, friends as a resource to be able to help you progress and find that optimal point in your life.
Zach, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me and sharing a little bit on the backstory for ADHD Online and your own journey. And I'm really glad that I asked for some clarification on your son being diagnosed, because I think that truly does speak volumes about how you set up and the standard of care.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate your time.